already out of the first book, so.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Paul. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry that I'm late. Coming from, I had a reading in Portland yesterday, so I stayed overnight there. My friend Bill Rohrback was reading in Portland, and what I didn't factor in was the potential of accidents on 295. So I was stuck there, and I thought I would make up my progress on Route 1. And of course, that's always a mistake, as you know. So it just got later and later and later and later. And so anyway, I'm sorry. But I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for staying. I'm delighted to be here. I love this library. The last time I was here, I saw Richard Ford speak, and this is kind of a definition of anticlimax. But I will do my best. I have a pretty broad career. I'm the editor of Down East Magazine, as you know, and I'm also the editor of Down East Books and downeast.com, and have to deal with a lot of digital issues these days. That's the reality of being in the publishing business. But primarily my great love, of course, is my own writing. And I'm fortunate that Down East has given me a lot of latitude in allowing me to write, and they do. I write mystery novels, as you know, probably. So what should we talk about?
Where do you get your ideas?
Oh, God. There are so many. At Down East, I'm fortunate to be reading constantly about Maine. And, my first book, which The Poacher's Son, started with an anecdote, actually, that occurred around here. Your local game warden, I think he still is, Joey Lefevre, shot a bear that was roaming around from farm to farm, killing pigs. And somehow this made its way into the news, and I saw it and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. It's like, I wonder what game wardens do. And I started to investigate more and more and thought to myself, well, geez, if I'm writing a mystery series, what an incredible job that they have, because they're involved in anything. Honestly, they're searching for Ayla Reynolds, the poor little girl who went missing in Waterville in the Kennebec River. So from the standpoint of a crime writer, it's really great, because you can get involved in anything. That's sort of how I began to get my ideas. Of course, what happens is that you have an idea and it sort of goes off on its own, and as it should, because the real life inspiration is not, you're not writing a true crime novel or or a true crime book or whatever it's called. So you should use the reality to begin to think about how do people think about this? How do they react? How do they respond to that kind of thing? What was going on in their own head when this was going on? I love true crime books, nonfiction books, but I think that they have a deficiency in terms of understanding human motivation. And I think that's what that's what fiction can do is that it can begin to kind of get inside about why do we make these stupid decisions, you know? It's always about motivation. It's always about the various impulses that drive us to decide things. And I think that's really interesting. I think that's why people will always respond to fiction, is that it's an attempt by a person to understand how other people think. What, you know, even if it's a warped thinking. Usually it is. So, you know, I think that's what that's why we read fiction, is that we seek to associate ourselves with either the protagonist or differentiate ourselves from the protagonist, and I think it's a really powerful impulse, and it will always be there, even in this digital age. So. I am a lifelong, well, not lifelong, but when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I don't remember exactly how old, I decided that I wanted to write novels after I read The Hobbit. I read The Hobbit, and my mom gave it to me, and I said to myself, I want to make people do this, you know, have this reaction that I'm having to this book. And so when I was in college, my parents rightfully asked me, well, it's all well and good that you want to be a novelist, but what are you going to do to make a living? And I would say that is the right question to ask any prospective novelist, especially somebody in their 20s or teens, because you have to make a living. So it's been something that I've aspired to for a long time, but how to make it work is another question, and how do I look at my work is another question. I wrote The Poacher's Son, which was my first novel, in my 30s, and I'll tell you how I did it. After having admitted that I was a lifelong, aspirant novelist, I decided that it was not very wise of me to focus too much on getting published. That being so mercenary about my own aspirations was getting in my way. So I had just taken a new job at Down East Magazine, and I moved in with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, on the Mid-Coast. I had been living in Brunswick. And I said to myself, I have no more excuses. I have a very steady job. It was the first time in my life that I had a 401k. And, the relationship thing was all established and all that sort of thing. So I said, I'm going to start writing a novel, because I've always wanted to be a novelist, and I've always had excuses for why I'm not doing it. And I did. And what I tried to do was to write without publication in mind. I tried to write the novel that I always wanted to read, but that I couldn't find anyplace else. And I tried to also take the pressure off myself by saying it doesn't have to be done tomorrow or the next day or the next day or the next day. Now, having said that, I got about 2/3 of the way done and said, this is a really good novel. I need to find an agent. I need to find a publisher for this. So everything kicked back in, and fortunately for me, it worked. I did find a publisher. I did find an agent. And she was very enthusiastic about it. And, I try to write now, these days, of course, it's a very strange thing to be writing when you know that something that you're doing is going to be published. When you're writing and you think, well, I'm not sure, all these second-guessing mechanisms kick in. But for me, these days it's really good. Although it's just as tense in its own way. I'm supposed to deliver a book in 2 weeks, but it's I'm revising it. So anyway, was that a? It was number 4. It's number 4. I have when I finished this series, the first 3, I found myself kind of at loose ends, and we pitched additional books in the series, and they got picked up. So we have 2 more books at least. So this is what I'm working on right now. It's called Massacre Pond. So, yeah.
A little nitty-gritty there. You mentioned finding a publisher and finding an agent. Was that the order you did them in, or did you do it in reverse order?
I did in reverse order.
And then how did you go about doing that? It's just,
I'm going to tell a pretty unfair
Anecdote about myself. No, I went through the very conventional channels of finding an agent, and which actually was sort of unconventional, but initially I found an agent through Down East. Somebody had called up the magazine looking for an agent because they had seen something that we'd published and said, I think that this would be a great book. And we said, great. Here's the phone number of the writer. And when that all had transpired, I thought to myself, well, great. Here's a literary agent, and I'll talk to this person. So I did, and it didn't work. This person was not the right agent for me. However, when I finished my book, I gave it to a range of people to read, and one of the people that I gave it to read was my ex-girlfriend, which I always say this, I know people always laugh. We parted on good terms, and she's a wonderful writer. She writes for Yankee magazine a lot, and she's, I thought, well, she'll be a good editor for this, and she was. She gave me some really good feedback about how to, make it better. But she said to me, well, if you're looking for an agent, you should go to Dennis Lehane's agent. And I said, great, I will do that. And then later I realized she doesn't really think that my book resembles Dennis Lehane. She thinks that I resemble Dennis Lehane, which she knows Dennis. So it was one of those kind of weird things where it was, but it worked. I went to actually, what happened was, I got the name, it was Ann Rittenberg, and I looked at it and I said, geez, I think that there's why do I know this name? Did she come up and teach at the Stone Coast Writers Conference, or, what was the story? So I went downstairs. This is where it gets kind of dicey. I went downstairs at Down East and talked to the circulation person and said, do we have an Ann Rittenberg who's a subscriber to Down East? And she said, no, we don't. But we have a Paul Rittenberg who has a place in Sedgwick. So I immediately went back to my computer and I typed in Paul and Ann Rittenberg. Turns out they're married. And yes, she has a house in Sedgwick. So I sent her my first chapter. I followed all the rules that she had laid out in the on her website about how to submit stuff to her, and it was really funny because what happened was that it got into a pile, and her assistant is the person who's charged with differentiating these things, like sort of saying no, yes, no, yes. And she had come up to Maine and was staying in the guest cottage at Anne's house and reading Down East magazine, which he loved. And so when my manuscript came along, it was like, oh, here's a novel from the editor of my new favorite magazine. And it gave me a little bit of a bump. But ultimately, what I would tell anybody is that what it matters is that, the book has to be the book. It doesn't matter what kind of entree you get. It's great to have some, reason for an agent or an editor to read the book, but ultimately what matters is that the book has to stand on its own. And fortunately for me, she felt that The Poacher's Son did. So, I'm thankful for that, and it seems to have been borne out. So.
And Anne went and found you a publisher?
She did. What she did was she put the book.
Not for auction, which is a different thing, but she sent the book out to 7 publishers at the same time and said, this is a really good book. Whoever gets it first gets it. And that was Macmillan. And they gave me a great deal. And they've been great to work with, so. Yeah.
So was it Macmillan that has the contacts with all of these people that wrote these wonderful excerpts from the book? Your excerpts are...
Oh, no. Oh, no. They're partly
Awesome
people,
writer.
they're partly, yeah. I know, it sounds that way, doesn't it? No, they're people that I know too.
So you knew Nelson DeMille?
No. I knew who, well,
Let's see. Tess Gerritsen.
I knew Tess,
And Julia Spencer Fleming was the name.
kind of knew her.
And Publishers Weekly, and John was...
I don't know Publishers Weekly.
I just, when I looked at...
No, I mean, what happens these days is that you sell a book to a publisher and they say, this is so wonderful, it's the best book ever. Who do you know? Do you know J.K. Rowling? I'm like, no, I don't know J.K. Rowling. Oh, darn. Because we could really have used that quote from her. It's like, oh, yeah, well, it's too bad.
I just thought they were really good for first novel.
Well, we worked on that, actually. What happened was my publisher came to me and said, look, is there anybody that we can send this to who might give a blurb? And then my agent said, is there anybody that I can send it to who could give a blurb? And then my publisher also submitted it to a few people as well. So that's how.
Likewise, do you then read other books to
I do.
put a little blurb in there?
I do, yeah. I mean, it's. I don't want to be. My own ethics are that I don't want to get into that machine where you just blurb something for the sake of career advancement or returning a favor or whatever. So I'm very careful about what I say. I have one right now. I'm trying to figure out exactly how I like it, but it's not. I'm not wild about it. I have to recommend it in a way that is very discreet, and I'm sure they're going to take it out of context. So anyway, yeah.
I would wonder if you have a full-time job writing and a full-time job obviously at Down East, and you're reading books for blurbs, and you have a life and a wife, and I don't have that many hours in my day. Is there
No.
something you can share with us?
Oh my God, no. Don't do what I'm doing. No, actually I do. I'm doing this in a very, I've made my decision that this is a 4-year, 5-year time in my life that I'm doing this. I can't sustain it. I write, Down East has been very flexible with their time, and they've allowed me to come in, for instance, at 11:30 every day. I can write in the morning. So that's wonderful. I mean, I really love that. And it's been helpful. But even that doesn't take into account like this, right? I did a reading yesterday. The reason I'm late is that I did a reading in Portland at noon and decided to try to pack in a bunch of Down East meetings in Portland in the afternoon to stay for a reading of a friend of mine at 7. And of course, this turns into a late evening and all that sort of thing. I stayed down there, was trying to come back here, thinking that this was really much more advantageous, actually, to be driving back through Damariscotta rather than coming back to Damariscotta from the Mid-Coast, right? Well, little did I know about, 295 traffic accidents. And it really eats into your time. I mean, the whole promotional aspect of being a writer is really big. And it's bigger, actually, than it used to be, because what you have is that small publishers used to always expect that of writers. It's like, hey, we can't pay you anything, but if you go out and promote your book, you'll get royalties. Now what's happening is that even really big publishers are expecting that their writers, will go off and do those sorts of things. Make themselves available to do readings and, radio interviews or whatever it is. So it's really kind of a new, in addition to all the challenges that it places on my life personally, it's also a new reality for all writers, which is that you're expected to do a whole lot more than you used to do. And it's definitely very trying. I think I can't even imagine, honestly, if I wasn't working at Down East, how to say yes to everything that I'm invited to do. Because it's so much. Just too much. Yeah.
How far have you gone to speak about your book?
Seattle. Houston. Yeah. And where's my mic that I can muffle? Down East does not give me any extra vacation time to do that. So for the last 3 years, all of my vacation has been spent promoting my books. I have not had a single day to sit on a beach. Now, poor me, right? But I say that for anybody who's aspiring to this. Know what you're getting into, No, I'm very fortunate, but it's the reality.
So the internet doesn't help at all?
Oh, it's worse.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you know why? Because there are so many blogs now, and they all want to have traffic, and they want to have interviews with you, and you never know as a writer. I can do a little bit of investigation, like, well, will this help me or not help me? So it's funny, I mean, when you have a book coming out, there begins to be this little wave of buzz, hopefully. And now we have lots of blogs and other kinds of agents sort of, looking for access to you, and you don't know whether it's a good use of your time. I mean, that's the thing. I think that's ultimately what this all gets down to, which is that is this the best use of your time to talk about your book, to promote your book? And some things are and some things aren't. So.
Does your agent help at all with that?
No. Well, no, she does. I mean, she's good about a lot of the business, which is very complicated. But in terms of like deciding whether I should speak at the Skidompha library or, the library in Bath, no, she won't get involved in that sort of thing, or the timing or whatever it is. No. Yeah.
Speaking of aspiring, why did you choose Yale?
Well, what did I choose Yale? I chose, that's easy, actually. I love the architecture. It's the only Ivy that has that great Gothic architecture. I mean, that Harvard is a good school, but it has lousy architecture as far as I'm concerned.
You ever study architecture?
What's that?
You ever study architecture?
No, I didn't, but I know what I like. Yeah.
Are you willing to share with us why you dedicated your most recent book, Bad Little Falls, to Monica Wood?
I will. Monica is a really dear friend of mine, and
She spoke with me.
oh, she did. What happened was this. I wrote the book, and I thought it was a really good book. Thank you. However, this is the earlier draft, in which I was very faithful to what I had observed in Washington County, including things like, this was not in the book, but I use it as an example of what was cut out. I spent many hours in the McDonald's in south of town in Machias. And when I was there, one of the things that I observed was a birthday party for somebody in a local nursing home. And she had come out, they had brought her out for this party. I don't know who made the cake, but 3 or 4 of the people who were in attendance were trailing oxygen tubes behind them. They had the masks on, they had emphysema, obviously. My editor and my agent said, this sort of thing is grotesque. It's off-putting, it's not. And I'm like, well, this is real in this part of the world. This is kind of how people live. So I got back this instruction to sort of make the book less grotesque, and which I did. But I was really at a loss about how to do it. And Monica is one of my dear friends. We've been sort of trading manuscripts for many years. And I said to her, what do I do? And she said, all right, you're going to come down here, and we'll have tea, and we'll figure this out. And we did. I went down there. I was so panicked. I mean, like I kind of was before I got here. I just felt like it was like, I don't know what to do. I have no clue. I mean, I wrote the book that I wanted to write, and I don't know how to change it because it will feel fake to me to take those things out of it. And Monica said, no, it doesn't have to be that way. We can figure a way to dial this back. And so I went down there and I worked with her for a day, and it saved the book. It made it, you know, I mean, if you've read the novel, you'll know that I think it's pretty fair to what life is like in any really rural Maine town. But it made it palatable for my agent and publisher. So that was good. And so, you know, when the time came to dedicate it, I said, it's got to be to Monica. So yeah, people think we're having a love affair. So.
If it sells books, right?
Yeah.
I have a question about family magazine.
Sure.
Do you get much reaction from people when you go around disclosing their favorite places that no one knows about and tourist attractions?
Of course. Yeah. Well, we don't. You know, I can't say I have a policy about that, but there are certain places that I'm not going to talk about that can't sustain, you know, a huge number of visitors.
Can you give us a couple examples?
I'll give you one from my own area. There's a place in Lincolnville called Duck Trap Harbor. And there's no sign. You need to know how to get to it. And it's right at the mouth of the Duck Trap River. We're not going to talk about that. Because it's not because we want to sort of, you know, conceal it from our readers, but because we want to make sure that, I mean, certain places just are not for that kind of broadcast. Down east, you know, we reach 100,000, actually more than 100,000 people a month. And, you know, you can't imagine them kind of, you know, focusing on a really fragile area. Now, sometimes we do get it wrong. Sometimes we'll recommend an area, or, you know, mention a place that that has a much more limited sort of carrying capacity, and I feel bad about that. I do. It's a really weird tension. You know, sometimes you want to promote stuff. Sometimes the land trusts want you to promote it, but nobody ever anticipates what it is to be in Down East. I mean, to give you a different example of this, with restaurants, I mean, if we do a restaurant review, if I did King Ider's Pub, you would never get in there for 3 weeks. They would just be overwhelmed. And I had a restaurant say to me, I'd written about them as a freelancer, and then I came back in a year later and they said, you know what, you kept us in business for a year.
Kept us in business, you're saying?
Yeah, just by writing about us. I mean, wow. Believe me, you know, that was an incredible sense of responsibility and accountability. So, anyway, sure.
I'm thinking about the poor zebra in chapter 2.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't.
It's okay, I will read that, but will you just talk a little bit about why you choose certain excerpts from your writing to read aloud, what goes into that decision?
That's a great question. I've never gotten that question before, and it really is good. When I wrote my first book, I had a prologue, which was the last thing that I wrote in the whole book. So if you've read The Poacher's Son, the prologue, that's the last thing I wrote in that book. And it was a great thing to read aloud. It was this very literary, 1,000-word thing that I could sort of present to you to make you think that I'm more talented than I am. Little did I know that I'd have to do this again. And when Trespasser came along, I had nothing to read. Nothing really kind of like did it, With Bad Little Falls, I'm reading usually the second chapter. And even that is not quite right. It's a little bit more absurd than the whole book. I think that, but it's true, which is to say that it's based on this idea that Maine has a grandfathered law that allows game ranches, which are very common elsewhere in the country. If you go into Texas, they're all over the place, which is that you put all kinds of animals into a caged environment, and then the hunter is able to hunt those animals in that environment. And it's thought of actually elsewhere as being very acceptable. But in Maine, I think we have a higher standard, and so people sort of said, we don't want these things. But what happened was the legislature decided we're not going to allow more. We're just going to allow the ones that currently exist to continue to exist. So, but the zebra to me seemed like the sort of absurd end of where this goes, which is to say that it's, look, if it's one thing if it's a red deer, which is very similar to an elk. It's another thing if you begin to add in other species that just don't belong here, and they do. Nobody in Maine does a zebra. That's me. But it's a warning to them not to do it. So, yeah.
Down East Magazine, do you only write with freelancers or contributors that you know? Do you ever take
We do unsolicited submissions, sure.
and what are their chances?
Not good. And here's why. It's not because they're unsolicited. It's more because what you're looking for. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to minimize my work. So I want to work with people that I don't have to edit a lot, right? People who understand what the magazine is, how we sound, what the right stories are for us. And, very often a freelancer is, adept at making a pitch to us about, fulfilling our every need. They're going to come over to my house and vacuum it, in addition to writing the story. That's like, okay, great. So you say yes, and then you find that you're really doing a lot of work on it when the piece comes in. So, it's not that we're antagonistic towards using freelancers. It's more that it makes it easier for us if we are all on the same page. So if somebody comes in from the outside and really understands our, frame of reference and that kind of thing, the tone, that's great. We'll work with them. So, we're open. I mean, that's the important thing, is that we are open, especially to ideas, because, you know, we're office bound too much, and always are, you know, love to hear about stuff that we wouldn't find on our own. So, yeah.
Has Downeast or will Downeast ever publish a collection of Caskey estimates?
We did.
Yeah. No. You can probably get it. I'm not sure if through Downeast or not. I mean, he was great. He's irreplaceable. So I don't know. I'm not really sure if you could, if you put it in order, if we have it or not.
Well, I was at your store last week.
It
Didn't have it. You know, it didn't
No, we did.
express
We
any
published
knowledge
it.
of it, actually.
We did.
It's just out of print. His wife is the person that I deal with if I ever want to reprint something. So,
Well, I vote for one.
okay, good.
His columns are just tremendous.
No, I know they were. In fact, when I redesigned the magazine about 3 years ago, and one of the biggest decisions that I had to make was whether to introduce an editor's column, which most magazines have. And I said to myself, the only way I'm going to do this is if I don't compete with Caskey. If I just sort of say to myself, you know what, I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to be, this is going to be half an hour, and I'm not going to be trying to be literary and E.B. White and stuff. And I think it's the only way that I'm able to make it work, actually, is when I have too much time to think about it, I get, you know, stage fright, because the stakes are so high. I mean, we recently, last month, we did a piece on Francis Hamabi, who is the first art director of Downeast, and his art is so incredible. I mean, it really, you look at it and say, wow, we feel like such pretenders to be in his tradition, you know? And that's kind of how I feel too. I mean, Downeast has employed Lou Dietz and E.B. White and all these really great people over the years, and I'm not going to ever be those guys. So I try to, you know, just sort of be humble and do my best. Yeah.
As a follow-up to your mentioning the Washington County scene with oxygen tanks and things like that,
Yeah.
one of my concerns about Downeast and Maine Magazine and Maine Home, Boats and Harbors, or whatever it's called, is that it gives the impression that we're all rich. And that, you know, we live this glossy life, and because I think we focus too much on the successful, affluent citizens of our state. And I was wondering if you would comment on that.
I would.
Well, the first important piece is that Downeast has never and will never, while I'm there, take an advertisement for or done editorial because of an ad. If you read Downeast, you'll know that we have lots of advertisements from Cross Jewelers. And I've never written about Cross Jewelers in 13 years. And we'll never do that. The day that somebody asks me to do that will be my last day at Downeast.
That's like when you read Maine Magazine.
I won't comment.
The connection
I won't
is so-
comment on
so
other
now it's
magazines.
ridiculous, but anyway.
However, and other magazines have different ethics. Let's just put it that
Well,
way.
I appreciate that.
What I would say, though, is this, is that I try to do stories about all of Maine. And, you know, some of them are easier than others to do, to pull off. But one of the things that when it comes to, say, spring, summer, you have to be aware of the fact that almost all of your advertisers are on the coast. I mean, it has nothing to do with me about what I want to write about. It has to do with, I mean, I have no control over who advertises in the magazine. You know, they come to us because they think it's a good place to be. And so it's funny, actually. I mean, I learned to sort of accept it as an absurd thing. When people say, oh, it's all retirement communities, it's like, I didn't go ask them to advertise. It works for them, And so, in fact, actually, that's one of the real sobering things about being an editor is that you think to yourself, people are subscribing to your magazine because of what you and your editors are creating, and then you realize, they're just really only getting it for the real estate ads, and which used to be a lot more in the old days. So I don't know. It's funny. It's a kind of a funny thing. It's really it's really a balancing act, which is to say that you're trying to have something that doesn't clash with your advertising, but kind of melds with it, that extends it a little bit further. I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, that my novels are my Maine. Down East is not my Maine. Down East is a job that I do. And I value the job, I respect it. But if you want to know what I think about Maine, read my books. That's what I'd say.
What percentage of the subscribers down this from the way or out of state?
I have never given a talk where that didn't come up.
Just the opposite of the other question.
Yeah, no, that's right, exactly. But the funny thing is that it's about 2/3 out of state. Now, in August, it's about half. So what does that say? It's people who own summer houses, who move here, for a couple months. And it's always been that way. It was that way when Down East had a circulation of 30,000. 20,000 was out of state. Now we have a circulation of 100,000, 33%, or whatever it is. Actually, 66% is out of state. It's just the way it is. And those readers really, what I've learned is that, the interesting part of the job is to balance the editorial content so that it's of interest and importance to people who live here year round, but is also dream fodder. You're living in New Jersey. It takes you an hour and a half to get into New York City every day. You happen to own a place in Cushing on the water. And all you do all year long is think about Cushing. And I have to be respectful of that person. I don't want to soft pedal Maine to them. But I have to understand that's a really big part of their life, is this idea of Maine as their escape. And, as somebody who lives, I'm a Maine native, a lot of you are. Maine sucks in so many ways, like every place does, right? I mean, we have, every place does. That's the thing, is that there are all kinds of problems that have to do with poverty and our lack of a manufacturing sector and all these sorts of things. If I were to focus on that, I will tell you one thing. People won't read it. People are very virtuous in their interests, but they're not virtuous with their pocketbooks, which is to say that you don't pay to read stuff that tells you bad news. You might go to find that stuff online for free, but when it comes to $30 a year, you don't want to hear bad news. It's really true. I mean, it's not true of Down East, it's true of everything. And so I feel, as a Maine native, a very complex, I have a very complex attitude about Maine, and just feel like a lot of it is really inappropriate to bring to the magazine. Which is really, it's not that it's a promotional thing, it's just that it's, the way that I always describe it is Down East is an optimistic magazine. It's not Pollyannish. Down East is optimistic, which is to say that Down East thinks that Maine is a good place that will get better. And I believe that too, but it's just part of my personal, attitude toward it, so. Maybe one more question, I think, I'm sure.
Try to compensate.
On the same vein, how well does your book do outside of the New England area, your books?
They do okay. At the moment, I have a very ardent fan base in Maine, I have to say. And sort of the goal is to, continually expand that beyond. The prototype would be, excuse me, somebody like Tony Hillerman, who wrote the Lee Porn and She books. People don't realize this. He was such a bestseller at the end of his life. But at the beginning, those books did not sell out of, New Mexico, Arizona. For many years, he was considered to be a very regional writer, and eventually they broke through and became a national book, or national series of books. So, I think that's the hope for me. I mean, I'm trying to write about stuff that. The next book, the fourth book, which is the one that I'm working on, is, I will give you a little tidbit, deals with Roxanne Quimby. Not by name. Although, yeah, she could sue me, I suppose. All right, well, one more.
You talked about being about ready to burn out. Should we worry that in the next couple books and that's going to be it, or are you going to still somehow manage to push through?
Yeah, well.
I'm a big fan, actually, of Van Reed, who's a Damariscotta author, and who worked in a series of books. And I think he kind of maxed out on those books in New York. But now he's beginning to do those books on his own. Obviously, every writer wants to be paid for their books, but the technology is changing what we can do, and if we're interested in self-publishing, we can do that too. And so, I hope that I know that I have 2 more Mike Bowditch books. I would like to write more, because I don't feel them to be constraining to me, in the sense that he's a really complicated guy. Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, so it's not like I in working with those things, I think to myself, oh my God, I'm in a straitjacket, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I can do. So I would like to continue to write those things. I would like to make more money doing them, like any writer. But we'll see.
Would you consider bailing out of down east and just working the novel?
All right, where's the camera? Down East has been very appreciative of me. I feel like I'm talking to the Korean government. No, I mean, yes. Sure, of course. Yeah, of course, someday. Well, when I was in Portland last night, this is why I was in Portland. I went to a reading at Longfellow Books by a friend of mine, Bill Rohrbeck, who Bill has been, he was a teacher at UMF in Farmington, a writing teacher. He's a great writer, he's a great teacher, and finally, after many books, after many years, Bill has a unalloyed success. It's called Life Among Giants, and it was chosen by Amazon.com as one of the best books of the year. And he's selling thousands of these things. It's a great book, and he read at Longfellow Books. You never know. I mean, in this life, that's the thing. You don't know what it is that's going to take you to that next step. And I'm humble enough, I think, with Down East to know that it's my way to, I take my job seriously. I feel like it's a great magazine. It's an important magazine, and I'm only the 4th editor in 58 years. 4th. So I take that really seriously, you know. But sure, of course. I mean, I think everybody who writes novels aspires to do it professionally. So it's a bit of a juggling act, and not trying to sacrifice one thing at the expense of the other.
Thank you so much.